Hello, I'm Danny, also known as GCSE Potential, and today we're recording How to Get into Oxford for PPE. I'm with James, basically the guru of PPE admissions. So why didn't you introduce yourself?
I'm James. I do PPE at Worcester College in Oxford. Went to state schools all my life, so I post content about PPE on LinkedIn, on TikTok, and tutor people on how to get into PPE at Oxford.
So that's literally his domain. He does everything to do with PPE. He knows all the resources. So we're very lucky to have him on. Thank you very much. So to begin with, what GCSEs do you need for PPE at Oxford?
All right, so the best GCSE to take is obviously going to be economics. There isn't really a philosophy or politics GCSE that's like commonly taught in schools, but economics you do find. That's the best one to take because you want to get that early introduction to economics, especially when you get to A-level. It makes it a lot easier. The other ones are basics, maths, English. Obviously you need all the normal ones. Try and do triple science if you can, just because it adds in those extra GCSEs, so more potential 9s that you can get. And then in terms of average, Oxford looks like an average of your GCSE scores. Usually it's across the top 8, so you're just trying to get basically 8 9s minimum. But if you have an average above an 8, like so 8.1, 8.2, that will be fine, but you're trying to get as high as possible.
That completely makes sense. And have you heard of any students getting in with like a lack of 9s, so maybe 8s and 7s and stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's very contextual, right? So if your school has a very low average GCSE score, then you can get away with like an average of a 7 or an 8. But if you go to a grammar school and that average is like an 8 or a 9, then you need to be getting an average of a 9. So it really does depend. So if you go to a pretty bad secondary school and come out with like a decent set of results, but not all 9s, you don't need to worry. I didn't get all 9s and I still got in.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to now A-levels. What A-level combinations do you need for PPE at Oxford? Which ones are sort of beneficial and what sort of grades are you looking at? So it doesn't matter if I get 4 A stars predicted versus only AAA. What are they sort of looking for?
Yeah, so they say that you don't need to take any of the PPE subjects to get in, and that is true. I know some people have gotten without it. But it definitely does help. I'd say the most important one to take is economics, because economics is a very technical subject. So when you're trying to do your interview, it helps a lot to have done the subject in an academic setting rather than just reading books. Philosophy and politics, I personally didn't take, and I don't think you need to. But if you do take them, it's going to help. Also, the interviewers know what subjects you take. So if you take philosophy, they're going to hold you to a higher standard during that interview. So it's kind of a game of like, if you do philosophy, you're going to be better off, but then you're also going to have to be at a higher standard during your interview. In terms of other A-levels, you definitely want to take maths. Like maths is recommended by Oxford, and yeah, you definitely want to take that. Further maths, not very important for PPE, but it will help. Like they're never going to be angry that you took it. In terms of like whether you do 4 A-levels or 3, I personally did 3 and an EPQ, so you definitely don't need to take 4. But if you can manage 4 as well as like preparing for Oxford in terms of admissions tests, definitely take it. I mean, why not? It obviously helps your application.
And what sort of grades overall do you need? So it doesn't matter if you have 4 A stars, can you just get 3 A's? What are they sort of looking for?
Yeah, so the offer is AAA, so of course you need that at a bare minimum. But what you're looking for is those 3 A stars predicted and then those 3 A stars at A-level. I mean, once you've got your offer, it doesn't really matter if you get 3 A's or 3 A stars, you're still getting in. But in terms of if you want to be competitive, everyone's basically applying with 3 A stars predicted. So in terms of making sure you're at the level that all the other applicants are at, you want to have those 3 A stars predicted.
I mean, talking about my own personal reflections, because I got, we don't like to use that word, unsuccessful application last year for PPE. One of the things that really screwed me over was the fact that in my philosophy interview, they asked me a question which was a bit dodgy, and I didn't really have the prerequisite knowledge in philosophy because I didn't study it at A-level. I think that if you have like adequate and sufficient preparation, you didn't take philosophy, did you? And James was able to manage it perfectly because he knew about the ideas, which we'll touch on later. But because I didn't know basically anything about the theories in philosophy, whatever, I didn't really have a good basis to start on. I think you can do pretty well if you have no previous knowledge, because they do expect nothing of you if you haven't done the A-level. But I think if you do have previous knowledge, it kind of gives you a grounding upon which you can start to develop your ideas. It just makes it a lot easier if you know about, like, I don't know, Aristotle and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. Okay, cool. Moving on. So you've done GCSEs, done A-levels. When you start to do the Oxbridge application process, the next thing is personal statement. Yeah. I think a lot of people obsess over the personal statement, especially for like humanities subjects. So PP is kind of humanities, social sciences. So how important is the personal statement? And then can you start to move on to what sort of stuff they should be including specifically for PP at Oxford? Maybe also touch on the other universities that you apply to and sort of what they look for.
All right, so for your personal statement this year, they have changed it and split it up into like 4 questions, but the content is still going to be the same. So what you want is a very academic focus. They don't really care, you know, what work experience you've done for PP. It's not really relevant.
DV Gold?
Yeah. They don't care about your DV gold or silver. So what you want is books, articles, research. Things can help like political activism, that can help because you're getting involved in Model United Nations. Those things are kind of useful, but what they really care about is books and articles. That's what you're going to be doing in your degree, analysing philosophical books, philosophical articles, economics, etc. When you're in year 12, what you want to be doing if you're year 12 right now is reading as much as you possibly can, getting involved with like essay competitions, getting involved with like research on your own. Like if you can do an EPQ, that's also good. You want to make sure you have as much knowledge as possible so that when you come to write, you know what to write about.
So I saw on your LinkedIn you were involved in the Green Party. That's quite controversial. And was that for your personal statement, or kind of like, how do you think it helped you? Did it come up in interview, if you don't mind?
So it didn't come up in interview, and my interview was just all theoretical questions. But in terms of being involved in the Green Party, I actually know the Green Party councillor from my area. And so when I was looking at work experience, I was like, let me just email him. And he was like, of course, come along, do this or that. It's a lot easier to get involved with the smaller parties. So if you email like a Labour MP, right, they're going to be very, very busy. Whereas a Green Party MP is going to be slightly less busy. So they're more likely to take you on. And also it's good to get that like real like grassroots level of like political, involvement, because they're literally going around knocking on every single door in the neighborhood. So you really get to see what it's like at that like really basic level.
Sort of, obviously PPE is 3 different subjects. So how are you meant to integrate that into your personal statement? Did you personally do 3 separate paragraphs, 1 per subject? Did you sort of entwine them? What do you think is the best approach?
So yeah, I definitely kept them quite separate. So I had 3 paragraphs: politics, philosophy, economics. And that's the easiest approach, right? Because they don't care if you're intertwining them. You can do that, but it's a lot harder to get right. A lot of the unis, especially like LSE, for example, they want you to have like a balanced amount. So you can have they want you to have the same amount of philosophy, politics, and economics. Sure, if one paragraph's slightly longer than another, that's going to be fine. But you need to have like all of them coming through strong. For Oxford, they do say you could focus on 2 or like a bit more, but like realistically, if you're going to go into an interview and be interviewed equally on all 3 of them, you need to have the same knowledge for all of them. So I went 3 paragraphs, separate for each, same length for all of them, and in the same level of depth, so that they know I'm committed to every single one of the subjects, not just like 2 out of 3.
Okay, so if you don't mind me asking, I'm going to split up the personal statement into like introduction, the 3 paragraphs, and then the conclusion. So to begin with the introduction, what sort of approach should you take for PPE? Should you start immediately with supercurriculars, or do you want to outline your motivation? What do you think you should sort of do?
All right, so in your introduction, you want to come across quite strong at the start with why you're interested in PPE. And you need to keep in mind that it's 3 subjects. So you want to have an introduction that covers all of 3 of them. So what I would suggest you do is you highlight like a specific issue, maybe in society or like an academic issue, where all 3 of those subjects are involved, and then say why you're interested in that. And then that should be linked throughout your personal statement, right? So if you talk about poverty at the start, obviously that has implications in philosophy, politics, and economics. And then you want to go into your economics paragraph, politics paragraph, philosophy paragraph, and you could talk about poverty in all of them. You don't need to. I personally didn't have like a running theme throughout, but that does make it like more readable and more enjoyable for the reader. You can also have like an anecdote, so maybe your first introduction to one of the subjects, although it can be a little bit cliche, so you want to do it in the correct way. But basically you want to come into your personal statement showing exactly why you care so much about the subject. The tutor should understand why you want to apply from PPE from the first sentence, that you shouldn't be taking a long time to fully understand that you really want to take this subject.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider that you're going to be doing the degree for 3 years, right? You need to be so committed, otherwise you won't be able to manage it. A few other things to keep in mind. You mentioned cliches. So many times I read personal statements where it's like, I went to India, I saw poverty, and I was like, oh my God, poverty's bad. Yeah. Poverty's bad, do you know that? Like, it's a bit dumb to do something like that. So I'd personally avoid it. Doesn't mean that it can't get you in, but I think it's a bit of a silly thing to do. So just keep that in mind. So moving on to the body paragraphs, we've said a lot about you need to do politics for this, economics for this, etc. What does that actually look like? So how can you sort of integrate supercurriculars? What supercurriculars did you sort of do? And how do you put them into a paragraph? So is it just like, I went to this conference and I found this interesting, or should you be giving your opinion? What should you sort of be doing?
Right, yeah. So what I usually say is you want to start light and then end heavy in your paragraph. So you usually want to start your paragraphs with some sort of activity that you did. So for me, maybe I started my politics one with a Model United Nations, and then find something that you found really interesting within that. And then you want to have an intellectual journey structure in your personal statement. So you start off with that Model UN, and then in the Model UN, you found a specific thing really interesting. And then because of that, you went and read X book, and then you had another question, so you went and read a Y article, and then you carry on like that. Now that structure shows the tutors that you're actually really interested, because of your own volition, you're gonna go and like go to this book, go to that book, go to that book. So it's not just a collection of random things you feel you've done because you think the tutor's gonna like be impressed by this book or that book. It's like you genuinely were interested in that subject. So you went and followed up. And in your paragraphs, you want to repeat that structure. So for politics, you have your intellectual journey. For philosophy, you have your intellectual journey. And then for economics, you have your intellectual journey. And by the end of your paragraph, you should be getting really, really niche. So the best personal statements I read, I don't know what they're talking about. Even though I study these subjects, I don't know who these authors are, what this theory is. You should be so far in depth that like even the people applying to your course don't know what you're talking about.
Amazing. So I think Freakonomics. What do you think about putting Freakonomics in your personal statement?
Anytime I see Freakonomics in a personal statement, it's just right. It's written off. You shouldn't. If other people know the titles of the books you're mentioning, that's a red flag. It should be like a really niche article or book that like no one else has ever read really.
How would you go about finding that? Because one of the things that I did for my personal statement was I used to go into Waterstones to just pick up a book that I think looked interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts or like what sort of approaches you take to finding niche stuff, since it seems like the good books are all, everyone knows about them basically.
So with this intellectual journey structure, it's not only your personal statement, it's also what you do in real life, right? So I would find a question that I was interested in that everyone knows about, like, you know, something really basic in philosophy, like ethics, for example. You read your first introductory book. That's not the book you're going to mention in your personal statement, but from that, I take notes on everything I read, go back through what was the most interesting thing, and then I look up that specific question and then put book at the end of the Google search. You're going to get into more niche books because it's like a whole book regarding one small question you had from your last book. If you repeat that process a couple of times, you're going to end up asking like Google the most niche question. And then you end up with a book that's like a whole book written around something that was like a couple lines in your first book. And then you're going to end up really niche. I personally preferred like the websites rather than like IRL bookstores. Because in bookstores, they have to make a profit. So they have to sell the books that are going to get the most sales. Whereas on Google, anyone can like list any book they want on Google for free. So it's going to be them academic books. Sometimes it gets a bit expensive. Academic books can be quite expensive, but you can always find them like illegally online, like the PDFs.
Websites that you shouldn't use, including PDF Ocean.
Yeah, definitely don't use those. And then, so if you keep repeating that intellectual journey process, you will end up in a really niche place. It's not very hard, but just don't try and get there straight away. Like, don't just think of a topic and then try and find the most niche book straight away. You have to do the prerequisite reading to even understand what the more niche book's talking about.
Amazing. And so to show that I'm kind of unique, how should I go about showing my own like original thought within the personal statement? So should it be that I say, oh, I found this interesting because, or should I try and form my own argument about a topic? So for example, in economics, if they mention Keynesianism, should I form my own argument maybe against it or in support of another author?
Yeah, that's a really great point. What you want to do is give your own opinion on every single book, right? So when you read an argument, don't just recite what the author said, and don't just say, I found it interesting. You want to say, I agree with this because, I disagree with this because, and then give your own reasoning. It's all about what you think. The tutors want to know what you think. They probably already know the book you're mentioning, so they don't care what the author said or what the author thinks. They care what your opinion on that is. And that's a really key skill, because when you get to Oxford, again, all the tutors care about is your opinion. In your essay, if you just recite what the author said, terrible essay. You need to tell them what you believe and give your own argumentation for that, and that's what they're looking for in your personal statement. So read books, but then give your own. You have to sit there and think about, what do I think about this book? You can't just go straight from reading to writing your personal statement. You have to have that intermediary step of like, what do I think about this topic? And then give your own argumentation for that.
Perfect. And did you mind talking about like one or two of your super curriculars that you put in your personal statement and how you gave an opinion on them?
So for example, I read a book about labor economics in America, and it was talking about how there's a duality between, as you become more productive, do you get more time off or do you get more money? And it was basically saying that the way the system is set up in America, they always just give you more money. They never give you more time off, and how that's an issue for not only like our economic situation, because you're going to get less productivity, people are going to get burned out if it's just more and more hours, more and more like pay. And so how I would like give my opinion on that is like, don't just recite like, oh, so this author says that like productivity is like gonna crash because people are working more and more and more. You want to say like, I believe that actually there's nothing wrong with people getting paid more. I didn't say that, but like you could take a contrarian stance and you would say like, I disagree with the author. I didn't find that argument convincing because of this reason, that reason. A good example would be in my philosophy paragraph. I was reading a book on free will and determinism, and the author was trying to reconcile determinism with free will. And personally, I don't believe that at all. So I went in quite hard on my personal statement. I said like, yeah, his argument was not convincing at all. It just supported determinism. It didn't it didn't add to free will at all because you changed the definition of free will. And that's what they want, especially since in your interview, they might ask you about your personal statement. They want to have, you want you to have opinions so that they can pick up on a bit. Why do you think this? Like, what was your reasoning for that? And then you can explain yourself and then seem even as a stronger candidate.
Right, so here's your personal statement on the screen. You've got to edit it in. Are there any thoughts you have on it after writing it? Is there anything you change, any strengths, etc.?
To be honest, I'm quite biased, but I like my personal statement quite a lot. So I mean, my introduction, as you can see, is extremely short. It's literally like a sentence. I would maybe make it a little bit longer if I was to redo the personal statement. I think the intro is one of the hardest parts, so that's why mine's so short. Maybe I'd flesh that like interest out a little bit more to make it a bit of a more easing them into the personal statement. In terms of conclusion, I think that's how you should write your conclusion. Use your like extracurriculars to evidence like positive qualities that you're going to have for the degree, and then the 3 main paragraphs. That's the structure you really need to have. You can write it like intertwined, so you could have like 2 large paragraphs. I think that's a lot harder to do. It can turn out better. Like if you did that really, really well, it might be even stronger than my personal statement. But like the fact that like it could go wrong and then end up with like the universities feeling like you only mentioned 2 of the subjects instead of 3, I don't think the risk is really worth it.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. That was a lot on personal statements. Okay, so the next step of the process is the coveted TSA. So there's so much to say about the TSA, like how important is it? How do you go about preparing? So I guess to begin with, can you give a quick overview of the TSA and sort of what comes up? And then the next thing is like what scores do you need, how are you meant to prepare, etc.
Can't stress how important the TSA is. The TSA is without a doubt the most important part of the application. So it's 2 parts for PPE. You've got the first part, which is 50 multiple choice questions in 90 minutes. So it's around 1 minute, 48 seconds per question. That's what you need to be hitting. And then the second part is an essay. So they switched it to online now. So you have a specific word count, 750 words in 30 minutes, which is quite tight. You're going to set it in October, and I would recommend you start preparing as soon as your year 12 mocks are over. So as soon as you've finished those year 12 mocks and got your predicted grades locked in, straight away, TSA is the next most important thing. There are limited resources though. So when you start revising, do not just go straight into like TSA papers because you'll run out of them very quickly. You want to use like the secondary, what I call secondary practice like things, which aren't built for the TSA, but they function like they are built for the TSA. Use those first. And then as you get closer to the time, because obviously you might finish your mocks in May, the exams in October. So that's quite a while. So you want to save those TSA papers for closer to the time. All right. So in terms of specifics for preparation for the TSA, for the section 1, the most important resource you're going to have is BMAT papers. So BMAT section 1 papers are like a harder version of the TSA, which it hurts my ego to say, but BMAT papers are a lot harder than TSA. So you want to I did every single one of those and you want to do them all. Remember, the hardest thing about the TSA is the time limit. So don't do any practice untimed. All of your practice needs to be timed. Every time you do a BMAT paper, there should be a timer on. And when you finish, you have to finish. Like sure, if you can finish the rest of the paper at a different time, but when the timer stops, you stop. Don't count anything else in your score, because that's the hardest part, is making sure you can go through it in the time. And BMAT, the timing is even tighter than TSA. So train for the BMAT, and then when you come to your TSA papers, it will feel even easier. I remember doing the BMAT papers, and when I came back to TSA, I was like, wow, this maths is seriously easy, because the BMAT is so much harder. So for section 1, there's 2 types of, there's 2 types of questions. There's critical thinking questions, which are wordy, and then there's problem solving questions, which are mathsy. The vast majority of people will find critical thinking a lot easier. So there's 7 types of specific critical thinking questions. So you've got main conclusion, draw a conclusion, assumptions, flaws. I'm gonna have to test my knowledge here. Parallel, principles, and then additional evidence. And what you wanna do is focus in on each specific type of question and then find the ones that you get wrong. So every time you do a TSA, don't just mark it, oh, I got this score and move on. You want to go through every specific question. Okay, which type of critical thinking questions did I get wrong? Okay, if I get these ones right all the time, I don't need to do those anymore. Let me focus on the specific ones I get wrong. So for example, a lot of people find the principle ones hard because you have to find the specific principle underlying. There's not like a real strategy for it. You just have to see it in your brain. If you don't see it, then you can't do it. So if those are the ones that you can't do, you want to specifically focus on those. So make sure you understand all the question types so that you can practice very, very specifically on what you want to do. For the critical thinking, there's IMAT critical thinking, which is like the CSA, but isn't that. You can look it up online. There's a website called Medic Mind who have all the practice papers there online for free. You can just go on there and find them. Do all of those if you're struggling with critical thinking. Obviously, the TSA papers are going to be your golden resource, but they're going to run out quite soon. The section that you're going to find a lot harder is problem solving. And for those, that's where the BMAT really comes in, because the BMAT is a lot more mathematical than the TSA. So you're going to just as many BMAT papers as you possibly can. And the best thing you can do is get a Word document. Every single question you get wrong, put it into your Word document and then keep going back through that. And what I would do is I would do a paper a day, and then I would go back to my Word document, and I'll go through all the questions I got wrong. If I get one right, I'll delete it from the Word document. Keep going until you end up with a document that was just the hardest questions that you cannot get right. And if you keep doing that, and if you like religiously practice that for months on months, you will end up being able to do any question, because it does get a little bit repetitive. After you've done like hundreds, thousands even of questions, you're going to start seeing similarity in all the structures of the questions. Okay, and then for section 2, the essay, a lot of people usually find the essay easier to revise for because all you have to do is write essays. One thing you do not want to fall into is essay plans. The applicants I know that were not so successful are the ones who only did essay plans. They didn't write out their essays. What you got to realize is you need to train for what you're going to do in the exam. In the exam, you're not writing an essay plan. You have to write all those words in 30 minutes, get it done, and make sure it's readable. So when you're practicing your essay, don't think, oh, let me just do a 5-minute essay plan. That'll be, I thought the idea, so it's fine. No, what you need to train for is writing those 750 words in 30 minutes. That should be what you're doing every single time. Now, in terms of resources for section 2, each TSA paper has 3 essay questions within it. So if you only had 12 like TSA papers, you have 36 essay questions. So you don't need any other resources. You just need the TSA papers. Do every single essay question from every single TSA paper, and I promise you will perfect the essay. It should take less revision than section 1. It will come quite naturally to PPE applicants because they're usually quite essay minded, and so it's like easier. You do need to also be up to date with your current affairs. You need to be able to bring in like real world examples into theoretical questions. They say there's no prerequisite knowledge, but if you don't know what's going on in the world, then you're not going to bring in those examples that you need. So make sure you understand what's going on in society, because the essay questions will often be based off them. Like during COVID, there was essay questions that related to COVID. So if you weren't aware of like what was happening to the economy at that time, you would have been, on a back foot. Write out all the essay questions. Don't do essay plans. Make sure you can bring in real world examples all the time. And then getting specific about the essay, there's a few different structures that work. You're obviously gonna wanna have an introduction, conclusion, and then in the middle of that, you can either have argument for, argument against, argument for, argument against, or you can have 2 arguments for and then 2 arguments against. It depends how fast you write, but since it's typed now, it shouldn't be a time issue. It should be more like a structural issue. So you want to have balanced argument. What they're looking for is, can this person argue clearly? And what you need to do is give the argument for, but then also give a strong case against. Don't make straw man arguments for the case against that you can easily shoot down. You need to have strong argumentation for both sides, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking to see, can this person argue for their own point, but can they also argue for the point against? Because that's what they're going to want you to do in your tutorials at Oxford, in your essays at Oxford. They're trying to test they're testing if they're going to enjoy reading your essays at Oxford. So if you write a really crappy essay for your TSA, they're going to be like, all right, he's going to do the same thing when he gets into Oxford, and I don't want that as my student, right? And the most important thing to lock in during your practice is to have a specific structure that you repeat every single time. When you come to your essay, you should already know the structure, because you should do the same structure for every single practice. And then it's just a case of like creating the points and then molding them into that structure. If you have that structure, it's very hard to go wrong. If every time you come to an essay, you do argument for, argument against, argument for, argument against, you can't go wrong, because you know exactly what you have to do. You just have to mold it to that specific question. So do that. And once you've done that enough times in your practices, the essay should become very routine. You look at the 3 questions, there's always going to be one that you know something about, mold it to your structure, bam, essay is done. The people who struggle the most are the people who try and create a new structure for every essay they write. If you're doing that, you're doing like 10 times more work than everyone else, because you're trying to like first figure out how you're going to lay out your essay, then how you're going to mold the points to it, and then it becomes like a lot more confusing.
Yeah, 2 things to say. Firstly, Matt Williams on YouTube. I don't know how much you agree with this stuff, but he is like an Oxford admissions tutor, I think. He makes a lot of videos to do with like PPE and just all the different courses. I think he has a specific video about the essay, from what I remember. So maybe check that out, because he's obviously an Oxford tutor who marks them, so you can give a bit of advice. The second thing, I'm just giving an own like anecdotal experience. Last year, October 2023, when I did my TSA essay, I remember writing about Andrew Tate, which is so funny. I don't remember, do you know what our questions were?
I wrote a question on, it was like whether businesses should only be for profit, and if they should have other incentives. That's what I wrote, but there's 3 questions, so.
Yeah, I think my one was about politics. I don't remember exactly what it was.
There was one about languages.
Yes, that's what it was. Yes, I did the question about languages, and I somehow said something like, Andrew Tate, basically, in 1984, I don't know if you've read the book, I'm yapping a bit, but there's something to do with like how language influences your like behavior. Yeah. So I basically said that like, because Andrew Tate emphasizes certain words, it influences your behavior. So for example, if you emphasize words which are like within the semantic field of violence, then people are going to get more violent if you talk about that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was kind of a mad essay, but it is what it is. So yeah, just parroting the idea of just using real world examples, and the general thought that if you write an interesting essay, they're going to like you more, especially since the essays themselves get marked by the college tutors. So like they see exactly what you write. It's their only opportunity to see exactly what you've written aside from the personal statement. But obviously personal statements are like, if you go to a better school, you're probably going to have a good one. So this is you raw and authentic, which is why it's quite important. Okay, cool. So now arguably the most important part, the interview. James applied to Worcester College, obviously the best college of Oxford, undoubtedly, very competitive. So do you want to run through sort of the interview structure that you get, how it varies from college to college, and then we can start to talk about prep.
So you're either going to have 2 or 3 interviews. A lot of colleges do 3 interviews. Worcester does 2. So it'll be like politics, economics, philosophy, 3 interviews. I had 2 interviews, so politics and economics were combined. They were 20 minutes each and they're online. All of the Oxford interviews are now online, which is not as good because they sometimes mess up. For example, for me, they forgot to send me my pre-reading before the interview. So I loaded on, and they were like, "Have you read the pre-reading?" What pre-reading? There's nothing in my email. So yeah, you gotta make sure you're ready. You gotta make sure your technology is set up. Wi-Fi needs to be perfect. You don't want to like crash during the interview. And then in terms of like how you prepare for the interview, you need to have an equal amount of knowledge on all 3 subjects. You can't get away with like not knowing anything about philosophy. Not knowing anything about philosophy, for example, because they're gonna test you on each like an equal amount, and they get really deep. I had 20 minutes to talk about politics and economics, and somehow we were still getting really deep into the subjects just in 10 minutes. For preparation, it's not like specific resources, but you need to be very, very fluent with your subjects. So you need to be able to pick up any topic within economics, any topic within politics or philosophy, and just talk about it. Like they can ask you anything they want and they're gonna expect you to be confident on it, even if you've never thought about it before. And the way you do that is by building up like a fluency in your subject. So just reading as much as possible, listening to as many podcasts as possible, thinking about as much as possible. If you do that for the whole of year 12 and like year 13 up until when your interview is, you'll become so versed in the subject that you can talk about anything. And what you want to do is have a very like more of a shallow rather than deep approach. So you want to cover as much as you can in like a decent amount of detail, but not very deep, rather than like a few specific topics in very large depth. Because if you just prepare for a few specific topics and they don't come up, you're absolutely cooked. They don't know what you know because you haven't had a chance to showcase it. Whereas if you do everything in a shallow amount of detail, anything they ask you, you'll have something to say, if you know what I mean. And if you have that familiarity with the topic when they ask you, even if you don't know too much, you can speak a lot more confidently. You can make sure you don't fall into like traps that like someone who'd never thought about the subject would fall into, and you can seem a lot more well-versed in your subject. So what you want to do throughout year 12 and year 13 is simply just listen to as much, read as much, do as much as you possibly can to understand your subject. There's not a specific like resource I can recommend you. It's just like as much as you possibly can. And then in terms of skills, because there's one part is knowledge and then the other part is skills. The skills part is just yap as much as you can about your subject. Like, so I had a really good group of friends who were applying for PPE, and every day at lunchtime, it sounds really nerdy, but every day at lunchtime, you sit down and you just talk about an essay, like a practice interview question, and you keep doing that every single lunchtime. You're gonna get so much better at speaking about the subjects, because it's not like the way you speak in interviews is not a natural thing. Like you have to define your terms, then you have to go into like explaining your thought process. It's not what you normally do, so you need to practice that over and over again until you can just pick up any subject and start talking. The way you think is not necessarily a sensical thing, like when you spit it out like to the interviewer. So you need to practice being able to think in a way that makes sense to someone on the outside, and like leading them through like from the question to your answer, leading them on a journey that doesn't have tangents. You just go straight to the answer.
ChatGPT is such a big thing nowadays. I'm wondering how you used it. So just to provide a bit of context for myself, what I did for TSA essays was, because I'd completed so many of them, I put all the previous essay questions into ChatGPT and asked it to generate like 50 new ones, and I actually generated pretty good ones. So that's like an example of something that you can do. And as well as that, if you struggle with an answer for the TSA, maybe you can put that into ChatGPT, ask it to explain it to you. I think with interview prep as well, ChatGPT has like a voice option. Yeah. I didn't use it that much when I applied for PPE, but when I applied for Econ, I used it a lot. So if you don't have any friends, or if your friends are just busy, you can basically say like, grill me on a topic. So I asked it to grill me on economics so much. And I got to a point like where we were questioning the foundational assumptions. And I think that's how deep you really need to go. Like, for example, how much does money actually matter? Like with regard to, happiness, so the Easterlin paradox and stuff like that. So from your own personal experience, did you use ChatGPT much? If you are going to use it, how should you use it in a way that helps you as much as possible?
Yeah, so it's really applicable in 2 parts, for the TSA and then for the interview. For the TSA, I would give a little word of warning. Sometimes I'd put in a multiple choice question and ChatGPT would just get it wrong. So you can't rely on it 100%, but it can be useful and it can spark that idea in your mind of like, oh, that's how you solve it, and then you go on and do it yourself. I would say it's a lot more useful for the interview. There's a lot of times when you'll be sitting in your room, you have no one to talk to, but you want to practice for your interview. I mean, like, there's nothing you can do apart from use like AI, use ChatGPT. It's really good for like having a conversation back and forth. So even if it doesn't give you the question, you find the question online, you give your argument and then you tell it, critique me. Now ChatGPT knows everything, so it's gonna have a critique for you, and you can just go on like this for like hours and make it like question everything you say, because that's what the interview is going to be doing. They're always going to try and find the counter argument, right? So ChatGPT can do that for you, and you're never going to win an argument against ChatGPT, so it's really good because you can just keep going until you're so exhausted you have nothing left to say. And the voice function is really good, because what you don't want to be typing out, because the way you speak and the way you type are very different speeds, and in the interview, if you're used to like typing out your answers, you're not going to be fast enough. You're not going to be able to hold the conversation at the speed that you speak. So yeah, talk to ChatGPT, it will talk back to you. That's good. You can also, like, another way to do it which doesn't use AI is like analyzing text. So if I read a philosophy book and I come to an argument that they've put in that book, I'll stop reading and then just think to myself, like, how would I disprove this? How would I argue against this? Keep doing that, and you can speak out loud to yourself in your room. You might seem a bit crazy. Your parents might hear you and think, what is this guy talking about? But it's really good to like try and argue against established authors in the field. Will like push so much pressure on you that you're going to improve so much in terms of your argumentation, in terms of analyzing, like, where did someone go wrong? Is there a fallacy? Maybe there's an issue with their data, something like that. So you can definitely use books, use ChatGPT. When you have people around you, that is the best. Like, you can never really like get better than just talking to a real person. I mean, ChatGPT is not at that level yet, where it's like a person.
Okay, cool. So to touch a little bit on, I know you mentioned earlier that there's not really specific resources that you have to use, but if you were to suggest just some broad resources for politics, philosophy and economics, which like YouTube channels, podcasts, etc. do you think are good?
Yeah, so there's a series of books that were created by Oxford called Very Short Introduction to. I love those books, especially for interviews, because they get relatively deep in a very short amount of time. So you can read through, I read through like 10, 20 of those books. And it gives you, like, they have like knowledge on all across economics, all across politics, all across philosophy. I'm actually reading one right now on art theory, which is so random, but
history of art.
but they're really, really good. And they get you like well versed in a topic in a really short amount of time. So that's good. Also, sometimes you don't feel like reading because it's kind of boring, so you want to watch YouTube. For philosophy, there's loads of good channels. You can honestly just look up like the subject, like the topic you want to look up, like ethics, for example, and loads of videos will come up. There are specific channels that are good.
Alex O'Connor's amazing.
Yeah, Alex O'Connor is very good, although some of his opinions are a little bit controversial, so you might not want to parrot him in your interview.
Okay, for economics, because I'm like the economics nerd here, the ones that I would recommend, there's 3 channels. The best one I think is Money and Macro. He's like a PhD guy. I don't know too much about him, but his content is really good because it talks about real world economics, well, sort of real world situations, and relates them to like A-level economics ideas. So for example, explain the economics behind austerity. And that's particularly important for PPE since austerity is like inherently politics and economics and a little bit of philosophy. So that's one thing. Another channel is Economics Help. I think the guy's name is like Tevjan Patanjil or something like that. Once again, same thing, using A-level econ to explain current day situations and even historical stuff. So I remember watching a really good video about like Thatcherism and like the economics behind it. And the third one was just Economics Explained on YouTube, the Australian guy. He was pretty good. Some of his videos got debunked from what I remember, so it was a bit weird. But for the most part, it seems good. And I think the really big benefit is like, since it covers such random and niche stuff, you can really just focus on what you find interesting, and it makes it a lot easier to talk about it. So for example, I remember watching a video about like, I think why colder countries are more economically prosperous than warmer countries, which sounds really random, but it was really interesting. So yeah, it just provides you a bit of ball knowledge to like back out, because I reckon if you backed out, other people probably won't, so that helps you stand out.
All right, for philosophy, the main channel that I absolutely love, I love this guy so much, his name is Jeffrey Kaplan. He's a lecturer in America, and what he does is he posts his lectures online. During COVID, he couldn't do his lectures in person, so he would do them on YouTube, and they're actually produced really, really well. But he covers so many niche topics like philosophy of language that no one else really covers. So before my interview, I binged watched all of his videos, like genuinely like hours and hours of content. And then during my interview, I used what he told me. I used the specific theories in my interview, so I definitely recommend him. For politics, you just want to keep more up to date with like current affairs. And something that's really good for that is the Oxford Union, the debates they have. If you can watch all of those, they'll give you so many different topics that you've never thought about before. And they'll also show you the way of like speaking and the way of thinking that you want during your interview, because they're debating. Those two YouTube channels will be really good. But you don't want to spend too long just watching YouTube. Like reading will obviously get into a lot more detail than a YouTube video ever can. So when you're feeling lazy, YouTube cool, but like books will always be your best bet.
So one of the questions they might ask you, I don't know how popular it is, but it's like, why Oxford, why PPE? So when those questions do come up, what answers should I be giving? Should I be saying, oh, because it's so prestigious and their reputation's amazing? Or what else should I be saying?
All right, so I personally pre-planned answers to all of those questions, and I would recommend you do that. It's not 100% necessary, and it's definitely not 100% they're gonna ask you those. But you wanna have an idea in your mind of like why, well, you should have an idea in your mind of why you applied to Oxford and PPE in the first place. In terms of what your answers should constitute, you don't wanna be talking about like, oh, Oxford's such a high standard of university, you know, I just really wanna go to the best university. You wanna talk about like attributes that they care about. So you could talk about specific societies, specific clubs that when you get here, you're gonna get involved with. Talk about the tutorial system. Definitely say like, I really enjoy like discussing my ideas out loud, because that's what you're gonna be doing for the majority of your time here. In terms of like why PPE, you need to show how much you love your subject. And it can't just be a basic like, when I was 5 years old, you know, like economics, I was on the TV and I found it really interesting. It needs to be like, oh, because I noticed this specific problem in society and I found it really interesting the way that economics attacked it, something like that. Get specific, get really personal, say something that only you like seriously care about, something that like they wouldn't have heard 1,000 other people say. Okay, and they might also ask about your personal statement. What they usually do is find a contentious point in your personal statement. So if you give an opinion that's not the norm, they'll focus in on that and tell you to like back it up. So make sure you fully understand all of the books you've read, because if you give an opinion on a book and then they ask you about it and you don't know what to say, it's going to look very, very bad. So you want to make sure you understand all the books in great detail. Any opinions you have need to be fully backed up. They don't always ask about your personal statement. If they do and you don't know how to answer, then you're going to look really bad. So you need to make sure, even though they probably won't ask you about it, you need to make sure you're fully competent on all the ideas in your personal statement. If you are really interested in PPE and applying to Oxford, I make some content. I have James Rutland on LinkedIn, james.rut7 on TikTok. And if you want some more like specific help, I do tutor for TSA, for personal statements, for interviews. You can find me on any of those social media sites. Just send me a message and we can arrange something.
Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much, James, for coming on, the absolute guru of PPE admissions. If you do have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments. Either James or I will respond. Hopefully this video was useful, and yeah, we'll catch you in the next one. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you. Bye.